So let's begin by first understanding what is a love language, and then we can talk about why they are important, right? A love language, Dr. Gary Chapman, in his revolutionary work on love and relationships, divided up the way we want to be loved into 5 different categories. Those categories are acts of service, gifts, physical touch, words of affirmation, and quality time. Each one of these has its own emphasis, and we all have all 5 of them. So all of us want to be loved in all these different ways. I mean, who doesn't like getting gifts, right? And who doesn't like physical touch or words of affirmation, unless there's something wrong? Most of us have a piece of all of these inside of us that we desire them. However, for all of us, according to Dr. Chapman, there is a particular way, at least one, maybe two, that we associate with being loved. So, and that's a very important distinction, right? Because for many people, hearing words of affirmation is what I would call a nice thing in the relationship. It definitely brings up positive energy, but it doesn't really touch that person in a place where they feel that this is a sign of that they're being loved. And same thing with quality time, right? Is it just for example, there are some people that even physical touch might not really do anything and do much for them. I shouldn't say anything, but do much for them. However, there are certain things that symbolize for each one of us that we are now being loved. And these meet a basic emotional need that we have inside of us, that each one of us has inside of them, that they want to feel loved, they want to feel accepted, they want to feel seen. So what Gary Chapman did was he broke this out into these 5 different types and talked about the significance of each, as well as encouraged people to learn not only their own love language, but as importantly, if not more importantly, the love language of their partner to better bring contentment and peace and connection and unity between you and your spouse. Great idea. Absolutely great idea. Brilliant. I'm very, very happy for his success. He really shifted so much of the dialogue, and we'll get into that in a minute, around relationships, and brought clarity to an area that was confusing. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the accomplishments of love languages and why it is important for us to know our love language and the love language of our spouse. Okay. Firstly, and one of the most significant reasons why love languages are important is because it helps us to understand our needs better. When we're not feeling it in a relationship, today they say ick. When it gives me the ick, when we're not feeling connected or close or in love, loved by our partner, or happy in our relationships, for most of us, it's just like this general feeling of just not feeling connected, right? And we can't put a finger on it. We can't necessarily put words to it. We just feel isolated and separated from our partner, right? And what Dr. Chapman enabled was he enabled us to, or Gary Chapman, I don't know if he's a doctor, what Gary Chapman enabled was us to understand ourselves better. We don't have to suffice with, I'm not feeling loved. We can now say, okay, well, knowing that my main love language is words of affirmation, so I understand what it is that makes me feel cared for and attended to and soothed emotionally inside. Big step forward in self-understanding. The second thing is, given this information, it allows us to reframe our entire relationship, right? So it's no longer he doesn't love me, or she doesn't care about me, or she doesn't know what's important to me. It's no longer that. What it is my partner's great at acts of service, gifts, and words of affirmation, but what I really need is physical touch, and that I'm not getting. So my partner is really doing a great job, and there's a lot of love in this relationship. It's just this detail I need more of. Huge shift in the way we see relationships. You can imagine how many relationships are saved by this idea that it's really not that bad. It's actually the relationship is actually going quite well, right? It's just that you're missing this one aspect out of many that can make you feel that much closer. So let's just, as a therapist, it's gold, because all we have to do is work on that one detail, and so much more of the relationship comes back together again, and people feel whole. People feel excited to be back in their relationship again. So rather than tossing the baby out with the bathwater, we're just identifying one detail, and we can all focus in on that. Brings a lot of positivity, a lot of sense of connection, a lot of sense of success, which is oftentimes a huge ingredient that's missing in couples that are in distress. They think the whole thing is, in the red zone, when actually it's just a small detail. So that's the second thing, reframing. The third thing, which is really, really fantastic about this whole conversation of love languages, is that although we do want to strive to know our own, it's just as important to know our partners, right? And that's really, really important. And that what that does, especially from a marriage therapy perspective, and even just if you're doing this alone with your partner, is it takes the emphasis off of you and your needs and puts it actually where it belongs, which is, how can I better show up for my partner? What do I need to do to make them happy? And again, most people that come to therapy are coming because that's usually not their first emphasis when they come to me. They're not really coming to me saying, hey, I really want to make my partner happy. I don't know how. They're usually coming because they're saying, I'm sad, I'm not getting my needs met. But this conversation about love languages really shifts the entire perspective. At some point, first we get to know ourselves a little bit better. First we reframe our own experience, and then we're able to focus on the other, which really changes everything in the relationship. Because as we all understand intuitively, when we're focused on our partner and making them happy, oftentimes we are the biggest recipients of the blessings of that. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is one of the great ways to utilize love languages is discerning whether or not you actually know your partner's love language. And this is a fun exercise I do with couples when they come to see me. And when we work on love languages, is I'll have each one of them take the love language quiz, and then I'll ask them, okay, before you share your results, I'd like you to tell me, what do you think your partner's love language is? And you can't believe how interesting this conversation can be, right? Because so many times we're going to see partners that don't know their spouse's love language. It's astounding. They can be married for 5, 10, 15 years, and they don't know it. And what comes from this conversation for both parties, for the husband and for the wife, is that you start to see how they see each other. So maybe a husband says to his wife, well, I think your love language is acts of service, right? And he'll say to her, oh, because you're always asking me to do this. You always want my help with that. You seem to be happy when I do this and that. Meanwhile, here's a woman who is longing for words of affirmation, right? She's pining away for her husband to say, you're doing a great job. You're the best wife. I'm so happy that I married you. You've changed my life in immeasurable ways. But meanwhile, in the husband's eyes, because of their day-to-day interaction, he sees her as a woman who only likes, only wants him to do the honey-do list. And that's how he feels that she's loved. So he may even emphasize that in an act of goodwill. He may even stress that for her and be great in those areas. And meanwhile, she's sad inside because he never turns to her and says, you mean so much to me, right? And vice versa. You could have a woman who thinks that her husband's physical touch, that for most men is their number one or number two, and most men wouldn't complain that badly if their wife's main connection, but I'm just using this as an example, where she focuses on physical touch, but what the guy really wants is for her to spend time with him, right? And it's just very fascinating to watch if you do this exercise and you don't let on that, you don't allow them to blurt out their love language right in the therapy room, but instead you ask them to guess what their partner's is and why. It's fascinating what comes out for both the husband and the wife, right? The wife gets to see how she's coming off in the relationship. She's seeing how she is showing up. It's like a mirror back to her. And no wonder she's not getting her needs met, because this is the way she's showing up. And the husband gets to see, hey, wow, I'm really not seeing this person that I'm with. So anyway, I can go on about that, but that's a very valuable tool. If you do work, if anybody here works with couples, or if you want to use this tool for your own marriage or your own relationship, you can download these love language quizzes. It's really great to, before you just blurt out what yours is, have that conversation. What do you think mine is and why? And then vice versa. Okay. So we've talked about the importance of love languages, right? We've talked, just to catch those who are just new here up to speed. We've talked about how love language helps us understand our own needs better. It puts words and ideas into this general feeling of unhappiness or dissatisfaction in our relationship. It talks about how it reframes the problems in your relationship to lots is going well, but there's a little bit, this one area I could use more of. Huge shift in our marriages. If we could do that with every problem, we'd be miles ahead of where we are most of the time, which is, oh my gosh, this relationship is terrible. My partner doesn't love me, right? The third thing, which we talked about, is that, love languages help shift the dialogue from I'm not happy and I don't know what to do, to let me hear what turns my partner on, and I have a lot I can change about myself and about this relationship, right? And the fourth thing is that it really gives us an insight into how we see our partner and how we're showing up in our relationship when you query your partner and ask them what they think your love language is. So I do appreciate using this. However, I have seen, and this is the point of this podcast, I have seen what I would call a detrimental trend in the idea of love language. So if you're just showing up now, we're just getting into the main title of the podcast, which is, why your love language is not important, right? So I've seen a detrimental trend. And what is that? What happens is that when we utilize love languages to define ourselves and understand ourselves better, on some level, we are imprisoning ourselves, and we are putting a prison around, we're putting jail bars around our relationship. What does that mean? Yes, we just spent a lot of time talking about the positives of love languages. We talked about how it helps you get to know yourself better, your partner better, and gives you opportunity to do. But at the same time, when we define who we are and how we need to be loved through these love languages, we put limits on how we actually experience our partner's giving, right? Because not every partner and not every person is going to be able to meet your love language needs. There are some people who are just not affectionate. There are men married to women, or I would say the other way around is at least as much. There are women married to men who are not affectionate. They're just not. And no matter how much you work with them, and no matter how hard they try, and no matter how many times you remind them, and no matter how many positive incentives you give them, they're not affectionate. There are some men who are not really good at expressing gratitude and emotions. I happen to be, if you follow me on Twitter, if you read my blog posts, I happen to be an extremely emotionally intelligent person. Well, you don't ask my wife, but in my in my opinion, I happen to be an extremely emotionally intelligent person. But that doesn't mean that I'm great at acts of service. It doesn't mean that I'm great at carving out time for me and my spouse. And if my spouse's love language is acts of service, and she defines through this process, she now defines herself as a woman of acts who needs acts of service, that could be very disappointing for her, right? We can see how this could be used as a weapon. Well, if you can't give me my love language, then what good are you? Right? Or if you can't meet my physical touch needs, then maybe I should look elsewhere. Or maybe you're withholding, or now you know that I love physical touch, you know that I love gifts, and you don't give them to me. So you're withholding my needs, right? I'm hoping I'm conveying that this is a double-edged sword. So on one hand, it's a deeply insightful tool for us to understand what we want and desire in our nature. On the other hand, it can be used as a bludgeon in the relationship and as an excuse for the worst possible outcomes, which could include leaving, because my husband just can't get it right. He knows I liked acts of service, and he's just unwilling to do that. Yeah, he's great at physical touch. And yeah, he always tells me that he loves me. And he always tells me I'm doing a great job. And he spends tons of time with me when I ask him to. And on Christmas, my tree is full of gifts, but he just won't do things for me when I ask him to do it. He just can't do it. He's not for me. How sad, right? So what I like to share with people is that the love language can be used in two ways. The first way we've talked about originally, which is to get to know yourself, get to know your spouse, have a plan of action of how you're going to try to take care of your spouse the way they need. But it's another, and John, I think you'll appreciate this because you're a very introspective person, and hope you too, from what I've seen on your comments on Twitter. But the second way it can be used is a guidepost for your personal growth. Why is it that you define what love means to you through acts of service? What's going on with you that's the only way you feel loved? What happened? What happened in your childhood? What happened in previous relationships? What mental processes or thoughts, beliefs, false beliefs are you adopting that's forcing you to define yourself as an acts of service type person? And how is that negatively affecting your relationships? How is that depriving you of the beauty of being with a person who gives you gifts and shows affection and tells you beautiful words of affirmation and loves spending time with you, and you can't see any of that because for some reason in your brain and in your heart, you're addicted to acts of service, right? This becomes your love language, becomes the, so to speak, the emotional growth plan for you to break out of that definition. I don't want to be a physical touch kind of guy. I want to experience love in all 5 of these ways, right? I want to be able to see all the things that my partner is doing for me. And I don't want to be limited by a definition of what love in my mind means to me, because everybody shows love in a different way. Everybody lets you know that you're important to them in a different way. And why should I not absorb that, gain pleasure from it, and experience connection with the person just because their way of showing incredible love doesn't match up with what I think, what I've taught myself to need? Doesn't make sense. So on one hand, it is important to understand yourself better, and it is a great tool to help your relationship get closer and help you, show up more, most importantly, help you show up better for your partner. On the other hand, rather than using it as a tool to define yourself, I like to look at it as a roadmap for how you can become an even more lovable person by learning to let go of those definitions which inhibit expressions of love which are coming your way all the time that you're deflecting because in your mind, that's not your way of being loved. If you need any help with that, come visit me at davidfeldman.com and follow me on Twitter at davidfeldman.